Please, please save my brother, the little black girl cried, her voice tearing through the rain-soaked silence of downtown St. Louis. The shout cut past honking cars, past flashing crosswalk signs, past the low hum of a city winding down for the night. People turned their heads, but only for a second. Most kept walking. She couldn't have been more than 12. Her sneakers were worn thin at the soles. Rain darkened the hem of her jeans. Her braids, once neat, were now half undone, clinging to her cheeks. With shaking hands, she grabbed the sleeve of a man stepping out of a sleek black town car. The man stopped. He rarely did. His name was Calder Vaughn. Tech billionaire. Media ghost. A man known for buying companies quietly and leaving rooms before people learned his face. He had just finished a private charity gala 2 blocks away. Glass walls, white linens, polite applause floating behind him like background noise. The street felt different. Too loud. Too wet. Too real. "Sir," the driver warned, stepping closer. "We should go." Calder didn't answer. The girl tightened her grip as if afraid he might fade. "They said no ambulance," she said, words tumbling over each other. They looked at him and they said he doesn't matter. Something shifted in Calder's chest. Not anger yet. Not guilt. Recognition. Minutes earlier, he had been on stage pledging millions to emergency response programs. Smiles. Photos. Promises. And now a child stood before him soaked in rain, saying help had been denied. Denied to her brother. "Where is he?" Calder asked. The driver exhaled sharply. "Sir." "He's bleeding," the girl said, eyes wide. "He can't stand up anymore." Calder looked around. A police cruiser rolled by without slowing. Neon lights from a closed diner reflected off puddles in the street. No one else was stopping. No one else was asking questions. He glanced down at her hands, small fingers, paint chipped from the nails, knuckles scraped raw. This wasn't a performance. This was fear. "Security," the driver said again, voice tight. "This isn't safe." Calder had spent his life avoiding unsafe things. Unsafe neighborhoods. Unsafe emotions. Unsafe reminders of where he came from. He looked down at the girl. "What's your name?" he asked. "Naima," she said. "Please." The word landed harder than the scream. Calder stepped away from the car. Rain hit his face. "Cold. Sure. Real." Naima gasped, not believing it yet. She turned and ran, glancing back to make sure he followed. Calder did, his dress shoes splashing through dark water, his pulse loud in his ears. Behind them, the driver hesitated. Ahead of them, the city narrowed. And Calder Vaughn realized he had just made a choice that would be impossible to undo. Because whatever waited at the end of that street was about to change everything. If you love stories like these, hit the subscribe button, as the stories will never stop coming. Calder followed Naima past boarded-up storefronts and flickering street lamps, the rain chasing them like it had somewhere better to be. Each step pulled him farther from comfort. This part of the city wasn't on maps shown at conferences. No security checkpoints. No valet stand. Just broken sidewalks and buildings that looked tired of standing. Naima ran like someone used to being faster than fear. Calder wasn't. His coat grew heavy with rain. His breath came sharper than he liked. He noticed things he usually didn't: trash piled near doorways, a shopping cart tipped on its side, the smell of damp concrete mixed with old oil. "This way," she called. Calder glanced back once. The town car was gone. So was the driver. He was alone now. And that scared him more than he expected. Calder Vaughn was a man who controlled outcomes. He planned 5 years ahead. He exited early. He never waited for consequences to catch up. People called him disciplined, calm, untouchable. They were wrong. He just knew how to walk away before things got complicated. That skill had taken him far. Far from the apartment where he grew up. Far from the nights his mother counted coins at the kitchen table. Far from the places where people looked like Naima. He told himself success meant distance. Yet here he was, following a child into a part of the city he'd trained himself not to see. Naima slowed near an alley mouth, breath hitching. She pressed a hand to her chest like she was holding herself together. "He's down there," she said, pointing. The alley dipped sharply, disappearing beneath a rusted metal overhang. Water streamed down its center, carrying leaves and oil stains with it. A low echo drifted up, someone coughing. Calder's stomach tightened. "Did you call anyone?" he asked. She shook her head. "They laughed when I tried." That did something to him. People didn't laugh like that unless they were used to not caring. Calder stepped closer to the edge of the descent. Cold air rose from below. The sound grew clearer now, ragged breathing, uneven and wet. "This is dangerous," he said, more to himself than to her. Naima nodded. "I know." She started down without waiting. Calder hesitated. Every instinct he had screamed to stop, to call someone, to pull back before this became a headline or a lawsuit or worse. But another instinct, the older one, the forgotten one, pushed him forward. He followed. The walls closed in as they descended. The rain faded overhead, replaced by dripping water and the hum of distant traffic. His shoes slipped once. He steadied himself against the wall, heart pounding. Then he saw it. A shape on the concrete. Too small. Too still. Calder moved faster now, steps echoing as he reached the bottom. The air smelled like rust and blood. Naima ran ahead, dropping to her knees. "Isaiah," she whispered. Calder stared at the boy lying there, and felt the ground shift beneath him. Because one look told him this wasn't just an emergency, that it was a reckoning. Naima knelt beside her brother like she'd done it 100 times before, carefully, quietly, as if sudden movement might break him. "Isaiah," she said again, softer this time. The boy didn't answer. His chest rose, then stalled, then rose again like it was arguing with itself. One hand pressed against his side, fingers slick and dark in the low light. Naima peeled off her hoodie and pressed it gently against the wound. Her hands were steady now. Too steady for a 12-year-old. Calder noticed that first. Not the blood. Not the fear. The steadiness. This wasn't new to her. She's done this before, Calder thought. Taken charge. Stayed awake when someone else couldn't. Grown up early because nobody else was going to do it for her. "Stay with me, okay?" Naima whispered. "Just like we practiced." Calder crouched nearby, unsure where to put his hands, his body, his authority. All the money in the world couldn't tell him how to help in this moment. "How long has he been like this?" Calder asked. Naima hesitated. "Since the stairs." She swallowed. "They pushed him. Not he fell. Not it was an accident. They pushed him." Calder felt his jaw tighten. Naima kept her eyes on Isaiah as she spoke, voice low and fast. "We were trying to get inside because it was raining really hard. He said to use the side entrance. The man didn't like that." She paused. "The man got mad." Her words were simple. Careful. Like she'd learned to tell the truth without inviting trouble. "Isaiah didn't do nothing," she added. "He just wanted to keep his bag dry." Calder glanced at the backpack lying a few feet away, old, patched, the zipper barely holding on. The kind of bag kids carried when it had to last more than one school year. "What's in it?" Calder asked. Naima smiled faintly. "His robot." Calder blinked. "His what?" "He's building one," she said. From scraps. It's not done yet, but it moves. The pride in her voice caught Calder off guard. He watched her then, not just as a frightened child, but as a sister, a protector, a witness, someone who knew the rules of survival in a way no boardroom ever taught. Naima adjusted the hoodie against Isaiah's wound again, jaw tight. I told him not to argue, she said. I told him to say sorry even if it wasn't his fault. Her voice cracked. But he didn't. Calder felt a flash of something raw and uncomfortable. Respect. The world didn't forgive boys like Isaiah for having a backbone. Calder knew that. He'd been one once. Naima finally looked up at Calder, her eyes sharp and searching. You're really gonna help, right? She asked. It wasn't hope. It was a challenge. Calder met her stare. Yes, he said. She nodded like she'd expected nothing less. Above them, footsteps echoed. A shadow shifted near the entrance. And Naima's expression changed, from focus to fear. The shadow belonged to a man in a security jacket, arms crossed, boots dry. Calder stood slowly. The guard looked at him, then at Naima, then at Isaiah on the ground. His expression didn't soften. It hardened. What's going on here? The guard asked. Calder noticed the way Naima stiffened before the man even finished speaking. Like her body already knew what was coming. He needs help, Calder said evenly. Now. The guard snorted. Kid tried to sneak in the back. Got clumsy. Naima jumped to her feet. That's a lie. The sound of her voice echoed off the concrete, sharp and desperate. Calder raised a hand slightly, not to stop her, but to steady her. He felt something building behind his ribs. Not panic. Memory. He remembered being that age. Being told to leave stores. Being watched too closely. Being assumed guilty before opening his mouth. He remembered learning early on that raising your voice could make things worse. The guard shifted his weight. You family? He asked Calder. Calder didn't answer right away. This was the moment. He could say no. Step back. Let the familiar script play out. He could summon lawyers, let systems grind forward without him getting dirty. That had worked for decades. Instead he asked, Who called you? The guard frowned. Event security. So you were inside. Dry. Warm, Calder said. While a kid was bleeding down here. The guard's face tightened. You accusing me of something? Calder looked past him, to the tunnel walls, to the wet floor, to the boy who hadn't moved in a full minute now. I'm saying the story doesn't add up, Calder replied. As he spoke, his gaze drifted back to Isaiah's hoodie. That's when he saw it clearly. The patch. Small. Hand-stitched. A gear wrapped around a lightning bolt. Calder's breath caught. He knew that symbol. He had paid for it. Years ago, long before reporters knew his name, Calder had quietly funded an after-school tech program on the north side. No press. No plaques. Just laptops, mentors, and space for kids who liked building things more than breaking them. The program had been shut down after a complaint. Permit issues, they'd said. Calder had signed the check anyway. Looking at that patch now felt like being punched in the chest. The guard followed his gaze. What? He said. That. Calder looked back up, his calm gone sharp. Yes, he said. That. And in that moment, the distance Calder Vaughn had spent a lifetime building, between who he was and where he came from, collapsed. Because the boy bleeding on the concrete wasn't just someone else's problem. He was proof. Proof that Calder had walked away too cleanly. The guard opened his mouth to speak. Calder reached into his pocket instead. And whatever he was about to do next would leave no room for silence. Calder didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out his phone. The guard watched him with mild irritation, like this was about to become paperwork, nothing more. Naima stood frozen between them, one hand still pressed to Isaiah's side, eyes moving back and forth like she was tracking a fight she didn't know how to win. "You calling lawyers now?" the guard muttered. Calder didn't look at him. His eyes were on Isaiah's face, too pale, lips trembling as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. "No," Calder said. "I'm calling for help." The guard snorted. "Already told you. Ambulance won't come for this. They're backed up." Naima's head snapped up. "You didn't even call." The guard shrugged. "Kid shouldn't have been back here." There it was. The sentence that ended conversations. The sentence that sealed fates. Calder felt heat rise slowly, deliberately, controlled but dangerous. "Say that again," he said. The guard sighed like a man tired of explaining gravity. "He doesn't qualify," he said. "No ID. No address in the system." "No." Calder cut him off. "He qualifies because he's dying." Silence followed. Not dramatic silence. The uncomfortable kind. The kind that made Naima's breathing sound too loud, that made the dripping water feel like a ticking clock. Calder crouched beside Isaiah now, careful, deliberate. "Stay with us, kid," he said softly. "You hear me?" Isaiah's eyelids fluttered. Naima leaned closer. "You remember the robot?" she whispered. "You still gotta finish it." Calder looked back up at the guard. "What's your name?" The guard hesitated. "Why?" "Because," Calder said, standing slowly, "you're about to explain to a lot of people why help was denied." The guard laughed just once. "You think anyone's gonna care?" Calder met his eyes. "Yes," he said. "They will." He tapped his phone, not dialing but recording. The red dot glowed. "I'm Calder Vaughn," he said calmly into the device. "And I'm standing beneath the Madison Street subway entrance. There's a 13-year-old boy bleeding on the ground. Emergency care was requested and refused. This," he added, angling the camera slightly, "is the reason given." The guard stepped back. "Hey, turn that off." Calder didn't. Naima stared up at him, eyes wide, not just with fear anymore but confusion. Power looked different this close. "Sir," the guard snapped, "you can't." "Too late," Calder said. Above them a siren wailed, passing by. Not stopping. Naima's face crumpled. "They're not coming," she whispered. Calder looked at the tunnel entrance, then at the dark ceiling above them. "No," he said. "Not yet." He hit another button. "Patch me through," he said quietly. "Now." And for the first time since Naima screamed into the rain, the city began to shift. The tunnel seemed to hold its breath. Naima watched Calder like he might disappear if she blinked too long. The guard hovered a few steps away now, unsure whether to back off or double down. Water dripped down the walls in uneven rhythms. Somewhere above, a train rumbled past, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. Isaiah coughed. It was weak, but it was something. Naima grabbed his hand instantly. "I'm here," she said. "I'm right here." Calder knelt again, careful not to crowd the boy. He took off his coat and folded it tight, pressing it gently against Isaiah's side to help the hoodie do its job. The blood didn't stop. That scared him more than anything else. His phone buzzed once. Then again. He answered without looking. "Yes." His voice changed, sharper now, focused. Not loud. Controlled. "I need a unit redirected," he said. "I don't care where they are." "Yes. Now." The guard scoffed. "You think you can just—" Calder looked at him. Really looked this time. The guard fell quiet. Naima swallowed. "Is he gonna die?" she asked. The question hit Calder harder than any accusation. "No," he said. "Not if I can help it." It wasn't a promise. It was a vow. Minutes dragged. Every second stretched thin and heavy. Isaiah's breathing slowed again, uneven like a skipping record. Naima's hands began to shake despite her effort to keep them still. Calder noticed. "You're doing good," he told her. "You didn't panic. You didn't leave him." She nodded, jaw tight. "I couldn't." That answer stayed with him. Footsteps echoed above, different this time. Faster. Purposeful. A voice called out. "Over here." Red light spilled down the tunnel walls as paramedics rushed in, gear clanking, voices sharp and practiced. They knelt instantly, assessing, speaking in code. Naima scrambled back, dizzy with relief. Calder stood aside, suddenly aware of how soaked and useless he felt. A paramedic looked up at him. "You the caller?" "Yes." The medic nodded. "Good thing you were." Naima clutched Calder's sleeve again, this time not to stop him from leaving, but to anchor herself. They lifted Isaiah onto a stretcher, oxygen mask snapping into place. He groaned softly as they moved him. Naima climbed into the ambulance without being asked. Before the doors closed, she looked back at Calder. "What if they try to blame him?" she asked. Calder met her eyes. "They won't," he said. Because standing beneath that city, wet shoes, dirty coat, heart wide open, Calder Vaughn understood something clearly for the first time in years. Saving Isaiah was only the beginning. The real fight was just about to start. The ambulance doors slammed shut with a heavy final sound, and the red lights blurred into the rain as the vehicle pulled away. Naima stood frozen at the curb, arms wrapped around her own chest, watching until the street swallowed it whole. Only then did her knees buckle. Calder caught her before she hit the ground. For a moment she didn't resist. She just leaned into him, breathing hard like her body had been holding everything in for too long and finally ran out of strength. "I thought he was gone," she whispered. He wasn't moving. Calder didn't rush to answer. He knew moments like this needed space. The truth was still sharp, still fragile. "He's tough," he said finally. "You kept him alive." She shook her head slowly. "They were gonna leave him there." Calder felt the words settle deep. They stood beneath the overhang of the subway entrance now, rain dripping steadily, police lights flashing farther up the street. The tunnel that had nearly become Isaiah's grave looked quiet again, too quiet, like it had already forgotten him. Naima wiped her face with her sleeve. "They always do that," she said, barely above a whisper. "Who?" Calder asked. "People with rules," she replied. "Rules that only work for some people." Calder didn't disagree. The guard was still nearby, talking into his radio now, posture tense, voice low. The confidence he'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by something smaller. Defensive. Calder watched him, then looked back at Naima. "How old is Isaiah?" he asked. 13, she said. "He just turned last month. We didn't have a party. But he didn't care. He said birthdays were just numbers." Calder smiled despite himself. "Smart kid." Naima nodded, eyes shining faintly with pride. "He wants to build things. Stuff that helps people. That robot, he says it's just practice." "For what?" She shrugged. "For when he's older. For when nobody ignores him." That hurt. Calder glanced back at the tunnel entrance again, replaying the image of Isaiah on the concrete. Too young. Too still. A police officer approached, notepad in hand. "I'm going to need a statement," he said, eyes moving from Calder to Naima and back again. Naima stiffened instantly. "I'll give it," Calder said. The officer raised an eyebrow. "And your role here is?" Calder held his gaze steadily. "I'm the reason this didn't get swept under the rug." The officer paused, then nodded slightly. "All right." As Calder spoke, he chose his words carefully. No embellishments. No threats. Just facts. locations, times, names. Naima listened quietly, absorbing every detail. When it was done, the officer closed his notepad. "We'll be reviewing security footage from the event," he said. Calder watched the guard's shoulders tense at those words. "Good," Calder replied. The officer hesitated, then added, "You should know, not all footage stays." Calder smiled faintly. "Oh," he said, "this one will." Because Calder Vaughn had already made sure it did. And the truth, once recorded, had a way of refusing to disappear. The guard spoke before anyone else could. "Look," he said, hands raised, voice tight, "nobody meant for it to go this far." Naima turned on him, anger flashing through her exhaustion. "You said he deserved it." "I said he shouldn't have been there," the guard snapped back. "Big difference." Calder stepped between them. "Is it?" he asked calmly. The guard scoffed. "You see kids like that every day. Always pushing boundaries. Always trying to get into places they don't." "Stop," Calder said. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The guard froze. "Say what you mean," Calder continued. "Not what you think sounds acceptable." The guard's jaw clenched. He looked suspicious. "Backpack. Put up. Hanging around an event he didn't belong at." Naima laughed bitterly. "He had notebooks in that bag." Calder glanced toward the backpack still lying near the tunnel entrance. Rain had soaked it through now. One strap was torn, barely holding on. That bag had almost cost Isaiah his life. "You didn't check," Calder said. "You decided." The guard bristled. "That's my job." "No," Calder replied evenly. "Your job is to protect people. You chose to judge instead." The guard shook his head. "You're acting like he was some angel." Calder felt something snap, not explode but harden. "He was a child," he said. That landed heavier than anger ever could. The guard looked away, muttering, "You can't blame everything on race." Calder sighed quietly. "You're right," he said. "But you also can't pretend it wasn't part of it." The officer shifted uncomfortably. Naima stood straight now, shoulders squared despite the shaking. "You didn't listen when I talked," she said. "You only heard him when he was quiet." The guard opened his mouth, then stopped. Behind them, another cruiser arrived. More uniforms. More eyes. Calder took out his phone again. "What are you doing now?" the guard demanded. Calder looked at him. "Making something very clear." He pulled up the footage. Grainy at first, then sharp enough. It showed Isaiah standing near the side entrance, rain pouring. It showed him lifting his hands, backing up. It showed a shove. The guard stumbled. That angle's wrong," he stammered. Calder held the screen steady. "No," he said. "That angle is honest." The officer leaned in, face tightening. Naima stared at the screen, tears running silently down her face, not from fear this time, but validation. "I told the truth," she whispered. Calder locked the screen and slipped his phone back into his pocket. "Yes," he said gently. "You did." And in that moment, as sirens faded and rain softened, Calder understood something undeniable. This wasn't just about saving Isaiah. It was about exposing a lie people were far too comfortable telling. And Calder was no longer willing to let it stand. The officer watched the last few seconds of the footage again, slower this time. No excuses. No blur. Just a clear shove, and a boy losing his balance. "That's enough," the officer said, straightening. "We'll take it from here." The guard said nothing now. His earlier confidence had drained out of him, leaving only a hollow stare and shaking hands. He was no longer in control of the story. Naima exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. Calder's eyes drifted back to Isaiah's hoodie, now lying across the opening of the torn backpack. The rain had washed some of the blood away, but the patch was still visible. A small gear. A lightning bolt. Simple. Inmate. Familiar. His chest tightened. Years ago, before the awards, before the interviews, Calder had quietly funded a small after-school tech program tucked into a church basement on the north side. No name recognition. No press releases. Just donated equipment and one rule. Give kids access to build something the world hadn't given them. The program didn't last long. Neighbors complained. Permits were questioned. Repairs were too expensive. The city shut it down without much noise. Calder remembered writing the final check and telling himself he'd done enough. He hadn't gone back. Now a boy lay in a hospital bed because the place that might have kept him safe didn't exist anymore. Naima noticed Calder staring and followed his gaze. Isaiah made that patch himself, she said quietly. He said every builder needs a mark. Calder swallowed. He's right. She studied him for a second. You know about robots? He almost laughed. Yes, he said carefully. I do. Naima hesitated. Then you know my brother's not bad, she said. He just likes figuring things out. Calder nodded. So did I. That surprised her. You? She asked, skepticism sharp. Calder smiled faintly. Especially me. He stood there, rain still falling, thinking about all the money he'd spent solving problems from a distance. Thinking about how easy it was to call charity work finished once it felt inconvenient. Isaiah wasn't an accident. He was a consequence. The officer finished making calls and walked back over. We're opening a formal investigation, he said. The footage helps. Calder met his eyes. It's backed up, he said calmly. Multiple copies. The officer nodded once. Good. Naima tugged lightly on Calder's sleeve. Can I go with my brother? She asked. Yes, Calder said immediately. And you won't go alone. She blinked. You're coming? Calder didn't hesitate. I am. Because something inside him had already crossed a line it couldn't come back from. And this time he wasn't looking for the exit. The hospital hallway smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Naima sat in a plastic chair, legs dangling, sneaker toes brushing the floor in nervous rhythm. Calder stood nearby, phone still in his hand, unread messages stacking up on the screen. He ignored them. Through the double doors, doctors moved quickly. Efficient. Focused. Waiting was harder than action. Naima stared at the floor. What if they changed their minds? She asked suddenly. Who? Calder asked. The police. The people with the footage. They always say we'll see, she replied. And then nothing happens. Calder sat down across from her. They won't be able to this time, he said. She looked up, searching his face. How do you know? Because the truth doesn't belong to just one person anymore, he answered. It's already out there. He showed her his phone, not messages but uploads. Time stamps. Secure links. Names attached. They can't erase something once everyone's seen it, he said. Naima nodded slowly. Isaiah says that too, she murmured. That once people see you they can't pretend you're invisible. Calder leaned back, absorbing that. A doctor finally stepped out. Naima shot to her feet. He's stable, the doctor said. We stopped the bleeding. He's lucky. Naima covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. Calder let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Can we see him? Naima asked. In a few minutes. She nodded, then looked at Calder again. You didn't have to stay, she said softly. Yes, he replied. I did. She smiled just a little. Down the hall, a television flickered to life. News coverage. Rainy street. Blurred lights. A familiar headline crawled across the bottom of the screen. Local incident sparks investigation. Footage under review. Naima followed Calder's gaze. Is that? Yes, Calder said. Her eyes widened. Already? He nodded. Already. Because the moment had rippled beyond that tunnel. Beyond that night. People were watching now. And Calder Vaughn finally understood something he should have learned long ago. Power didn't matter when it stayed quiet. It mattered when it showed up. And the story was only half told. The hospital room was dim except for the steady green glow of a monitor beside Isaiah's bed. Each beep landed like permission to breathe. Naima stood close, fingers wrapped around the metal rail, afraid that if she let go, even for a second, something would take her brother away again. Isaiah's eyes were half open now, unfocused but alive. That was enough. Calder watched from the doorway, giving them space. This part wasn't his. Some moments weren't meant to be entered, only protected. Isaiah shifted slightly. Did it work? He whispered. Naima leaned in, her voice breaking. You're still here. He tried to smile. Came out crooked. A nurse adjusted the four and glanced at Calder. He's lucky someone acted fast, she said. Calder nodded. Someone did, he thought. And it wasn't me. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Yes, he said quietly, stepping into the hall. A voice on the other end spoke quickly, urgently. Calder listened without interrupting. I don't want statements, he said when the voice paused. I want accountability. He hung up and stood there for a moment, staring at the blank wall. For years, Calder had believed staying silent was safer. That influence worked best when it moved behind the scenes. Quiet checks. Quiet fixes. Quiet exits. But quiet hadn't saved Isaiah. Noise had. He walked back into the room as an officer knocked softly at the door. Mr. Vaughn, the officer said, lowering his voice. We've identified the security contractor involved. Suspension effective immediately. Charges are under review. Naima stiffened, leaning closer to Isaiah. What does that mean? She asked. It means, Calder said gently, the truth is being taken seriously. Isaiah looked at him, eyes clearer now. Are you the guy from the video? Calder smiled faintly. I guess I am. Isaiah studied him, then murmured, You didn't look scared. Calder paused. I was. Isaiah nodded. Me too. Something settled between them. Later that night, as Naima dozed in the chair beside the bed, Calder stood by the window and watched the city lights reflect on the wet streets below. He had every reason to leave. Instead, he made another call. This time, there was no recording button. Just intention. By morning, the story was everywhere. Not just the footage, but the context. The unanswered calls. The ignored pleas. The way it all could have ended if one person had decided to look away. Reporters filled the sidewalk outside the hospital. Phones buzzed constantly. Names trended. Naima woke to noise and fear. They're outside, she whispered to Calder. Is that bad? Calder shook his head. Not today. A city official arrived before noon, face tight with concern. Apologies were issued. Investigations announced. Carefully chosen words stacked neatly on top of each other. Calder listened. Then spoke. This isn't a press problem, he said evenly. It's a people problem. And it's been around longer than that tunnel. Silence followed. The official nodded slowly. What are you asking for? Calder glanced at Isaiah, asleep again, breathing steady. For once, he said, I want the fix to last longer than the headlines. Paperwork moved faster after that. The guard was formally charged. Contracts were reviewed. Policies revised. None of it erased the shove. But it stopped someone else from being next. Naima stood beside Calder as a reporter asked, "Why did you get involved?" Calder looked down at her first. "She asked me to listen," he said. "So I did." Naima squeezed his hand, small fingers, strong grip. Later, after the cameras faded, Calder sat alone on a bench outside the hospital. The rain had stopped. The air felt clean in a way it hadn't the night before. He thought about the program he'd let disappear. About the children who hadn't had someone to stop. About the boy inside dreaming of machines that could move on their own. Calder closed his eyes. Then he stood. Because fixing one night wasn't enough anymore. And what he was about to do next would surprise everyone, most of all himself. Hospitals had a way of stretching time until minutes felt like hours and hours felt like punishment. By the second day, Naima knew the rhythm of the place. The squeak of nurses' shoes, the beep of machines, the low hum of conversations people thought you couldn't hear. She sat curled up in the chair beside Isaiah's bed, homework spread across her lap even though she hadn't written a single word. Calder watched her from across the room. She tried to be brave, but bravery at 12 came with cracks. Her leg bounced when she thought no one noticed. Her eyes kept drifting back to her brother's chest, counting breaths. "You don't have to stay up," Calder said softly. "He's not going anywhere." She shook her head. "I'll sleep later." Later had always been the promise. Calder understood that more than he wanted to admit. Isaiah stirred, groaning lightly. "Naima?" "I'm here," she said immediately, leaning forward. His eyes opened, clearer now. "Did I mess things up?" he asked. Her brow furrowed. "What?" "The robot," he whispered. "I was carrying it and everybody got mad." Calder felt something twist in his chest. "You didn't mess up," Naima said firmly. "You never do." Calder stepped closer. "Sometimes," he added, "people get mad when they see something they don't understand." Isaiah frowned. "Like new ideas?" "Yes," Calder said. "Exactly like that." Isaiah smiled weakly, then drifted back to sleep. Naima finally leaned back, exhausted. "He always thinks things are his fault," she murmured. Calder looked at the monitors, the wires, the careful systems keeping Isaiah alive. "Kids learn that," he said. "Usually because someone teaches them." Naima didn't answer. Outside the noise had calmed. The cameras were gone for now. The city had moved on to the next headline. But inside the waiting room something important was forming, slow and deliberate. Calder realized this was where change actually began. Not on stages. Not in press releases. But in quiet moments when nobody was watching, and decisions were still being made. He checked his watch, then his phone, draft messages unsent. This wasn't about charity. It was about repair. And he knew exactly where he needed to start next. Because waiting was over. The doctor delivered the news without ceremony. "He's going to live." Naima didn't move at first. She just stared like her brain needed time to believe the words belonged to this moment. Then she inhaled sharply, and everything broke loose. She cried into her hands, shoulders shaking, the sound raw and unfiltered. Years of fear, responsibility, and second-guessing poured out at once. Calder stood frozen for a beat, then stepped forward, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Some things only required presence. Isaiah woke later that afternoon, groggy but smiling when he saw Naima. "You look ugly when you cry," he muttered. She laughed through tears. "Shut up." The room felt lighter now. Not fixed. Not perfect. But alive. A nurse brought in the backpack a short while later, cleaned, dried, stitched enough to hold together. She set it beside the bed. Isaiah's fingers brushed it instinctively. "My robot," he whispered. Calder watched that moment closely. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was telling. That bag held more than parts and wires. It held identity, purpose, possibility. That night, after Naima finally fell asleep curled up in the chair, Calder sat alone at the window again. The city lights looked different now. Less distant, more demanding. He pulled out his phone and scrolled back years, to contacts he hadn't called in a long time. Names attached to buildings, boards, approvals. He selected one. "Tomorrow," he said quietly into the phone, "I want to reopen something we never should have closed." On the other end, someone hesitated. "Are you sure?" Calder looked back at Isaiah, breathing steadily. "Yes," he said. "I am." Because surviving wasn't the victory. What came next would be. And it would start in daylight. Calder didn't sleep that night. He sat in the guest chair beside the hospital bed long after the lights dimmed, long after the hallway noise softened into distant echoes. Isaiah's breathing stayed steady now, no longer fighting for space. Naima slept curled in on herself, one arm draped protectively across her brother's blanket. Outside the window, the city moved the way it always did, forgetting fast. That bothered Calder more than he expected. He thought about how close this had come to disappearing. One wrong turn. One ignored cry. One man choosing convenience over conscience. He thought about how often that happened without witnesses. Calder had spent years convincing himself that systems worked if you funded them properly. That distance was efficiency. That silence was professionalism. But silence had almost buried a 13-year-old boy under concrete and rain. He stood and walked quietly into the hallway, phone in hand. No cameras. No press. Just him and the decision he'd been circling since the tunnel. He scrolled through old records, programs defunded, notes marked non-essential, ideas abandoned because they were too local to matter. One file stopped him. Northside Youth Tech Initiative, closed. Calder stared at the screen, jaw tight. This wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't guilt. It was clarity. He dialed. "Sorry for the hour," he said when the call connected. "I need permits expedited." There was a pause on the line. "For what?" "For a place kids can build without being suspected first." Another pause. "That'll take time." Calder looked back through the glass at Isaiah, then at Naima still holding his hand in her sleep. "No," he said calmly. "It won't." By the time he ended the call, the sun was beginning to rise. Pale light crept through the windows, catching dust in the air and turning it gold. Calder exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running numbers. He was committing. Because walking away had always been easy for him. The staying was new. And it would cost him far more than money. 3 weeks later, the rain was gone. Sunlight poured over a newly renovated brick building on the north side of St. Louis, its front doors propped open, voices spilling out into the street. Cameras lined the sidewalk, flashes popping as a small crowd gathered. A banner stretched above the entrance. "Opening today." Inside, tables were lined with laptops, toolkits, half-built machines. The air buzzed with curiosity, the good kind. The dangerous kind. Calder stood backstage, adjusting his cufflinks, listening to the murmur of reporters. This was the part he usually hated. The explaining. The framing. The risk of being misunderstood. An aide leaned in. "They're ready for you." Calder shook his head. "Not yet." He scanned the room until he spotted them. Naima stood near the front, wearing borrowed sneakers and a dress she kept smoothing nervously. Isaiah sat beside her, thinner now, a faint scar peeking above his collar, but smiling, eyes bright as he took everything in. "They did all this?" Isaiah whispered. Calder crouched beside him. "You helped." Isaiah frowned. "How?" Calder smiled. "By not giving up." A ripple of applause rolled through the room as someone stepped onto the small stage. Calder stayed where he was. The microphone squealed once. Then quiet. "I know you're expecting to hear from me," Calder said as he finally stood, his voice carrying without effort. "But today isn't about me." Confused looks spread through the crowd. Calder turned and waved. "Naima," he said, "would you come up here?" Her eyes widened. "Me?" He nodded. The room went still as she walked forward, steps hesitant at first, then steadier. She climbed onto the stage, hands clenched at her sides. Calder handed her the microphone. She stared at it like it might bite. Then she looked out, at the crowd, at her brother, at the space that didn't exist a month ago. "My brother lived," she said softly. The room leaned in. Because one man listened when everybody else didn't. Calder stepped back. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. But the weight of the moment wasn't in the noise. It was in the girl standing tall where silence once stood. And most people missed the real shock entirely. Calder Vaughn didn't take the spotlight. He gave it away. And nothing about him would ever be the same again. Naima held the microphone with both hands now. Not because she was scared, but because she wanted to be steady. The room stayed quiet. Not the awkward kind. The listening kind. "My brother didn't look like someone worth saving to them," she said, her voice soft but clear. "He was wet. He was hurt. And he didn't belong where they wanted him to be." A murmur moved through the crowd. Isaiah shifted in his seat, eyes locked on her. Calder watched him watch her. Naima took a breath. "I didn't know yelling would work," she continued. "I just knew I couldn't stop." She swallowed hard. "They say kids should be quiet, that we should wait our turn. But if I had stayed quiet, my brother wouldn't be here." The words landed heavy. A few people wiped their eyes. Others stared straight ahead, faces tight with recognition. Naima glanced back at Isaiah. He nodded at her, small but sure. "So this place," she said, gesturing around her, "isn't just a building. It's a promise. That kids like him don't have to get hurt before someone listens." Applause broke out then, real, uneven, emotional. Naima flinched at first, then smiled shyly as it grew louder. Calder felt his throat tighten. Years ago he would have measured this moment in reach and reputation. Today he measured it in something else entirely. Truth. Afterward, reporters rushed forward with questions. "Naima, how does it feel to speak nationally? What do you want to be when you grow up?" She looked overwhelmed, eyes darting. Calder stepped in smoothly. "She wants to go home," he said kindly. Laughter rippled through the group. Naima tugged his sleeve. "I do," she whispered. He smiled. "Then let's do that." As they left the building together, Calder noticed something subtle but important. People stepped aside for Naima. Not out of politeness. Out of respect. And Calder understood then that something had shifted, quietly, permanently. Because this wasn't just a story people consumed. It was one they carried with them. Later that evening, Calder returned to the building alone. The noise was gone. The lights were low. Half-built projects sat waiting on tables like thoughts paused mid-sentence. He walked slowly, fingers brushing the edge of a workbench. This place felt familiar in a way he hadn't expected. He remembered being Isaiah's age, hunched over broken radios, pulling them apart just to see how they worked. He remembered the looks, the suspicion, the way adults assumed curiosity was trouble when it came in the wrong skin. He stopped in front of a table near the window. On it sat a robot, small, uneven, wires exposed. Isaiah's. Calder picked it up carefully, studying the joints, the mismatched parts. Somewhere between the flaws there was brilliance. He smiled. A voice echoed behind him. "Cool, right?" Calder turned. Isaiah stood in the doorway, crutches tucked under his arms, Naima hovering just behind him. "You shouldn't be here alone," Calder said instinctively. Isaiah shrugged. "I wanted to see it one more time." Calder handed him the robot. "You finished something most people never even start," he said. Isaiah frowned. "I got hurt." Calder nodded. "So did I." That surprised him. Calder crouched slightly, meeting his level. "The world doesn't always reward people who build," he said. "But it needs them anyway." Isaiah looked down at the robot, then back up. "You gonna stay?" he asked. The question was simple. It wasn't about buildings or money. It was about presence. Calder didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Yes." Naima smiled. Outside, the last of the day's light faded, settling gently over the street. Calder had spent a lifetime outrunning where he came from. Now, standing here, with a boy who reminded him who he'd been, he understood the difference between success and purpose. Success got you out. Purpose brought you back. And this time, Calder Vaughn wasn't leaving. Not when the future was still being built. The street looked ordinary again. Cars passed. A bus hissed to a stop. Someone laughed too loud on a phone call. If you hadn't seen it before, if you hadn't been there, you'd never guess that a cry in this same place had almost gone unheard. Calder stood across from the Madison Street subway entrance, hands in his coat pockets, watching the city move around him. Weeks ago, this had been just another route home. A space he didn't acknowledge. Now it felt like a marker. He thought about how easily the night could have ended differently. One step back. One choice to stay dry. One decision to let someone else handle it. Most people didn't ignore cries like Naima's because they were cruel. They ignored them because they were busy. Afraid. Trained to mind their own business. Trained not to listen too closely. Inside the news center, kids laughed and argued over circuits and screens. Their voices spilled out through the open windows, echoing down the block. Calder smiled faintly. Systems mattered. Policies mattered. Money mattered. But listening, that was the beginning of everything. Listening was what changed a night from tragedy to turning point. Listening was what took a girl's scream and turned it into a future. A woman walking past the building slowed, peering inside. "What's this place?" she asked. "A place where kids get to build," Calder replied. She nodded thoughtfully. "About time." Calder watched her walk away, then looked back once more at the tunnel entrance. Not with regret. With resolve. Because the next cry wouldn't come with a warning. It wouldn't come with cameras. And chances were, it wouldn't come to someone famous, rich, or prepared. It would come to someone ordinary. Someone like him, before that night. And the real question wasn't whether help existed. It was whether anyone would stop long enough to hear it. Because listening doesn't make headlines. But it saves lives. "Please, please save my brother." The words didn't echo in the tunnel anymore. They echoed in Calder. Every time he passed a place people usually ignored. Every time a headline blurred into background noise. Every time he felt the old urge to stay distant. Naima's voice had changed something permanent. Isaiah healed quickly. Not just his body, but his confidence. He came to the center every afternoon now, backpack always zipped, robots slowly becoming something new. Something better. Naima came too. Not to speak. Not to perform. Just to belong. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. It never did. But it became different. Calder still traveled. Still worked. Still negotiated deals worth more than most people would ever see. The difference was this. He came back. He stayed connected. He made room. Because legacy wasn't about what you escaped. It was about what you returned to make better. The narrator's voice softened here, slower, more intentional. Maybe strength isn't loud. Maybe courage isn't dramatic. Maybe sometimes it sounds like stopping in the rain and listening. And maybe, just maybe, the next time a voice cracks with fear in a place nobody else wants to look, someone will remember this story and choose not to walk away. If stories like this move you, stories about resilience, courage, and quiet acts that change lives, stay with us. This is Slush Stories, and we tell them because they matter.